What's up guys, Sean here, and today we're going to talk about some more candidates running for president on the Democratic side. Not too long ago, I did a video about the strong, stunning, and brave women running for president on the Democratic side. I had a lot of fun making that video, you guys seem to enjoy it, so I decided to profile 3 more candidates, this time they're all men, who are running for the Democratic nomination in 2020. And we'll start with the most recently announced candidate, Bernie Sanders. That's right, Bernie Sanders. Bernie!
You know, it's funny, sometimes American journalists talk about how bad a country is because people are lining up for food. That's a good thing. In other countries, people don't line up for food. The rich get the food and the poor starve to death.
Feel the burn. Free college.
Way back in, 1961, they invaded Cuba. And everybody was totally convinced that Castro was the worst guy in the world. All the Cuban people were going to rise up in rebellion against Fidel Castro. They forgot that he educated their kids, gave them health care, totally transformed the society. You know, not to say that Fidel Castro or Cuba are perfect, they are certainly not. But just because Reagan dislikes these people does not mean to say that the people in their own nations feel the same way. So they expected a tremendous uprising in Cuba, it never came. And if they are expecting a tremendous uprising in Nicaragua,
point out that when we were in Moscow, for example, I think most of the people here also were extremely impressed by their public transportation system. The stations themselves were absolutely beautiful. Including many works of art, chandeliers that were beautiful. It was a very, very effective system. Also, I was impressed by the youth programs that they have, their palaces of culture for the young people, a whole variety of of programs for young people.
Fight climate change.
Millionaires.
You better watch out. Millionaires and billionaires. Bernie Sanders. Free college. Because you have Democrat in front of it. Bernie Sanders.
But always from the bottom on up.
Sanders was cheated by Hillary Clinton in the primary. Hillary stole the nomination. Bernie 2020, the revenge play. Oh, God. Bernie Sanders. Now, while Bernie's one of the easier candidates to make fun of for all of us, you have to understand that Bernie Sanders is in the top 2, if not the front runner in the Democratic primary as of right now. In my last video, when I brought up Elizabeth Warren, I talked about how Bernie Sanders entering the race basically would eat up her entire progressive base. Bernie is the candidate of that progressive base. He has a large group of loyal followers that work for him. They're going to be active, they're going to be volunteering, and they're going to show up to vote. On top of that, because of all the stuff that came out about the DNC during the 2016 primaries, those voters are angry and they're ready for this 2020 revenge play. And while we're all going to have a good time laughing at Bernie Sanders, don't forget, like 12 to 20% of Bernie Sanders' primary voters switched over to Donald Trump in the general election. So Bernie is not only the front runner in the Democratic primary, he has a really good chance at being the next president of the United States. He can beat Donald Trump. The polling from the 2016 race indicated that he had a much better chance in the general election than Donald Trump. Now, that doesn't mean 100% that he would have beaten Donald Trump. Remember, he didn't win the nomination, so he wasn't attacked during the general election season. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But Bernie has remained one of the most popular politicians since the 2016 election, and Donald Trump's approval numbers, while good for him, are not good overall for a president going into re-election. Obviously, we're going to have to wait and see to know how this all plays out, but Bernie has a legitimate chance at the nomination. He's the front runner for the nomination, and he has a good chance of beating Donald Trump for the presidency. It's much more difficult to beat a sitting president than just to assume the presidency when a term has expired, but he does have a good chance, as good a chance as anybody in the Democratic primary, except for maybe one candidate that I'm about to mention. On the other hand, there is a candidate that I don't think will have any chance, although people in the media will tell you that he's a 2020 frontrunner, and that is Beto O'Rourke. who is actually Robert O'Rourke. He called himself Beto when he was running against Ted Cruz because he was trying to out-Latino somebody named Cruz. Now, from what I understand, O'Rourke was a progressive darling during the primary for Senate on the Democratic side. He raised an outrageous amount of money and small donors in the Democratic primary, but in the general election, he came off as really weak and milquetoast against Ted Cruz. And one of the reasons why O'Rourke raised so much money to go against Ted Cruz is because for Democrats, Ted Cruz is like the most hated senator across the board. But Beto did lose that election, and when it became clear that he was going to lose that election, he refused to give any of the money that he raised to other candidates running other races that were more competitive across the country. Now, the reason the media will tell you that O'Rourke is a frontrunner and he's a great candidate is this really old school Washington mentality that basically states that if you're a Democrat in a mostly Republican state and you're a popular politician, then you're a good nominee for the presidency. And that kind of establishment thinking is not unique to Democrats. This was the same logic that told us that Mitt Romney would be a good candidate in 2012. Because he was a Republican that was the governor of Massachusetts, a deep blue state, he was considered this unifying, cross-party appealing candidate. Even though that wasn't true, that wasn't remotely true. The fact is, occasionally in statewide races, blue states go red and red states go blue, and that does not necessarily make a good presidential contender. Oftentimes, candidates who win statewide office in these circumstances are considered milquetoast or too weak by the base. This is only an illusion from the media that they're strong candidates because they've done this. So to me, O'Rourke is done. He's garbage. He needs to go home. He has no chance at the nomination. As soon as he tried to out-rally Donald Trump and like around 1,000 people showed up to his rally while tens of thousands showed up to Trump's, it became clear to me that the support for him came from people who hated Ted Cruz way more than they actually liked Beto O'Rourke. Now, this next candidate probably presents the biggest threat to Bernie Sanders out of anybody in the field, and that's Joe Biden. I'm not sure if he's actually announced yet, but Joe Biden ran for president basically every single time since like 1980. The only time he didn't run was in 2016 when Hillary Clinton somehow convinced him not to do so. But had he ran, he would have got way more support than Hillary Clinton. He might have won the nomination, and he probably would have beaten Donald Trump in the general election. Now, Joe Biden has a little bit of progressive support, but that's not where his path to the nomination lies. Where his path to the nomination lies is amongst black voters. Joe Biden is really popular amongst African Americans, especially African American Democrats. He was the vice president for the first African American president in history. He's clearly going to have support from the establishment Democrat wing of the party. And that might not sound important to you and me, but you got to remember that these establishment Democrats, the movers and shakers in the Democratic primary, they might not be able to garner a crazy amount of votes to overcome Bernie Sanders. But what they can do is raise money and essentially discourage people from continuing to run. So Joe Biden's path to the nomination is going to come from his ability to knock certain candidates that eat up his establishment portion of the vote out of the race. Let's say we get through the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire primary, and Bernie Sanders has won both with about 30% of the vote. Joe Biden finishes second with 25%, and you have all these Democratic establishment candidates around 7, 8, 9%. The Democratic establishment is going to put pressure on those candidates to leave because Joe Biden has a better claim to those voters than Bernie Sanders. Biden also is the only candidate who can pull white working class people away from the Sanders camp. I think he has a strong base in African American voters, and right now Bernie Sanders is killing it with Latino Americans, but I think Biden can cut into that in a way that other candidates just can't. The fact is, the way the field is laid out now, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are the only ones who aren't going to have to go crazy on the intersectional side in order to get out of the primary, so they won't be as damaged going into the general election. Like Bernie Sanders, his appeal to white working class voters in a general election makes him really dangerous to Donald Trump. So I can see a situation where Bernie Sanders is in the lead in the primaries early, Joe is trailing behind at second place, and all of the establishment candidates, almost in unison in a coordinated way, get out of the race in order for Biden to have a path to the nomination. And while the Bernie or bust crowd, the core of Bernie Sanders' base, won't be happy if Joe Biden gets the nomination, I think voting for Biden is a much easier pill to swallow for them than voting for Hillary Clinton was. especially when we found out all the tricks that Hillary Clinton was doing behind the scenes. I think there will be some behind the scenes tricks because that's just how politics works, but they'll be less offensive to the Bernie Sanders voters, and they won't get out as much. Like, the email leaks really ticked off the Bernie Sanders voters. Donna Brazil's statements about how the DNC was working during the primary and the general election really ticked off Bernie Sanders voters. So yeah, while this is subject to change and anything can happen down the line, I do think that Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are the 1 and 2 for the Democrats. I think they both have the clearest path to the nomination. I think they both don't have to run crazy left, even though Bernie Sanders is crazy left, but they don't have to run crazy intersectional racial politics left in order to secure the nomination. And while I think Donald Trump will have an added advantage in that he's already the president, I think these are the candidates that are actually the best candidates to beat Donald Trump. They won't be nominating the worst possible candidate like they did last time around, as long as things kind of stay where they are right now. Anyway, that's all I really have for you guys today. Let me know what you think about the Democrats' 2020 prospects in the comments down below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content, support me with one-time donations via PayPal, or join up on Subscribestar and Patreon. This has been me talking about the Democrat 2020 nominations. Till next time.